Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to your morning huddle. Now, please welcome to the stage your host, Kaylee Hartung.
Who doesn't want to up their game, right? So this morning we're going to be talking about how anybody playing season-long fantasy can translate that skill set into success playing daily fantasy sports. We've got some of the best guys, some of the most successful guys in the country to help us talk about that. Special thanks to DraftKings for making this session possible. Let's get this started. Guys, start walking on up. Drew Dinkmeyer, you might know him as Dink Piece if you've watched his success. One of the earliest stars playing daily fantasy sports. You do not want to play this guy in a tournament because he's definitely going to beat you. And if you want to quantify success playing daily fantasy sports, how about the number 20 million? Because Peter Jennings has won more than $20 million playing fantasy sports. And we've also got former quarterback Matt Weiner and former NFL safety Tank Williams helping us out as well. Well, guys, yeah, we can give a round of applause. If our rehearsal yesterday is any indication, an hour with these guys is going to fly by. Okay, so let's start, guys, with, if you could each sort of give me a point of the skill set you develop playing a season-long league that's transferable to playing daily fantasy sports. Where is that crossover?
Yeah, I think the first thing, if you're a season-long player, that you'll notice is every week you're analyzing your roster to try to find the best matchups. You're trying to decide between your quarterbacks and your running backs and who they play and the opposing defenses and how weak those defenses are. And the same skills translate to daily fantasy. The difference is, instead of only having 2 quarterbacks to choose from or 4 running backs to choose from, you have the entire pool to choose from. So those types of skills in terms of analyzing matchups are the same thing from seasonal fantasy to daily fantasy. They translate very well.
Yeah, and all the work that you do in preseason to prepare for your drafts. Like right now, you guys are getting ready for your friends and family leagues, and you're playing a lot of the national leagues, the high dollar leagues. You're doing all the work that you have to do now to be prepared for the season. So you know which quarterbacks have, great matchups based on who they're playing that week or across the entire season. All this work you're doing on your depth charts now, looking at ADPs, who's the number 4 wide receiver, the number 10 wide receiver, who do you think is going to be a sleeper that's going to outperform? All of that stuff can get monetized on a week-to-week basis in daily fantasy, where after your draft happens, well, you're just kind of focused on the 12 or 14 guys that are on your particular roster, as opposed to, as Drew said, you have access to the entire player pool every week in daily fantasy.
Yeah, another thing I think that's big that you can take from your season-long leagues and the daily is you're always evaluating injuries. You're looking for those guys who got hurt and the guy that's going to replace them. So in your season-long leagues, someone gets hurt, you're going to your waiver wire to see if you can pick up the backup who's not going to get all the opportunity. Same thing applies in daily. A guy, star running back gets hurt or wide receiver goes down, automatically the backup is going to be a great play in daily because they're going to be cheap and they're going to provide a lot of value. So the same thing you're looking for with injuries in your season-long leagues is really applicable in daily fantasy as well.
You two guys play fantasy at all?
So I do. I don't, actually.
Your only experience comes with your 8-year-old, right?
My first year playing was last year with my 8-year-old son, so I can see why everyone's enamored with it. I thought it was fun, but no, I have a different perspective. Obviously, we talked about yesterday that I think maybe I can help some of you guys from a quarterback's perspective on what we look at watching film. And I was talking to these guys yesterday, kind of how we break down film, how we reads and progressions, and when do we attack certain players, which can help you guys, when your teams, your players are in the red zone or, third down, all that kind of stuff. So I'm sure we'll get into that a little while. But I'm not an experienced guy, but I love being here because I think it's fascinating. I really do.
And Tank, you play,
Yeah,
right?
and so for me, I think the format really helps a lot too. I think a lot of people, they play leagues where you have 1 quarterback, maybe 2 running backs or flex and 2 receivers. So me, one of my favorite leagues that I play, you have 2 quarterbacks, 2 running backs, 3 receivers, 2 tight ends, a kicker, and a defense. So when you have a league like that, you have 10 people on your bench. You have to know all the fringe players, like all the third wide receivers who may have upside, and I think that really helps you in the daily fantasy game as well.
Just curious, who was on your team last season?
My 3 starting wide receivers, I had Odell Beckham Jr., I had Randall Cobb, AJ Green, and yeah, that was pretty good. I picked up Martavis Bryant early, but then I dropped him because the Steelers didn't use him. I guess I think it was maybe his second game playing, I picked him up. And he had like a decent game, and I held on to him for a little bit, dropped him, and then he exploded for like 3 games in a row. So.
Well, you guys all come at fantasy sports from a very analytical standpoint. Your respective backgrounds, what, 2 of you in finance, professional poker. How do you balance the analytics with film study?
I think it's really important with football. A lot of the other sports, you know, like baseball is an individual pitcher versus batter matchup, and kind of you're looking at those things. But football, there's a lot of art to it. And talking to these guys, we can learn a lot. Talking to these guys about how they assess defenses from Tank's perspective, how he looks at offenses, and how coverages might impact the types of receivers that they're covering and different things. So there's definitely an art and a science to it. We definitely use a lot of data because it's the stuff we're accustomed to analyzing. But there's a lot that can be learned from how to watch the game from a player's point of view that we're hoping to learn as well.
Well, what insight can you guys give us? Let's start there with the way you approach the analytics of it.
For me, I'm looking for volume. So I want to know who's going to be on the field for the most snaps. That's 1. You can't score if you're holding your helmet on the sideline. 2, for running backs, I want to know how many touches is somebody going to have. For wide receivers, I'm looking at targets. Quarterbacks, I'm looking at how many attempts are they going to have. Or if it's a dual threat quarterback like Russ Wilson, is he playing against a man-to-man defense this week or a zone defense this week? If it's a man-to-man defense, probably more opportunities for him to run the ball out of the pocket because the DB is going to have their backs turned to him. Then he gets a zone where they're always facing him and he's not going to get the opportunities to run. So for me, I want to pile up as much volume and opportunity as I can because I can't control how many yards they're going to get, how many yards they're going to get after the catch, how many touchdowns they're going to score on a given day. But if I tell you that Le'Veon Bell's going to touch the ball 30 times this weekend, and such wide receiver is going to get 12 targets, and I'm going to try and roster 4 or 5 guys between my 3 wide receivers, tight end, flex position that are going to get me 10 to 12 targets each. I have a really great floor because if they all get 12 targets, they all get 7, 8 catches, at a full point PPR on DraftKings, I've got a ton of points to start the week without even counting yards or touchdowns.
Yeah, so I go back to the matchups. That's something that I really look at. I'm a big line of scrimmage guy, so I want to find attack defenses that either have a really weak secondary or a really weak second cornerback, or they just can't stop the run. So Drew's team, the Bears, last year was pretty terrible stopping the run. So you can stream running backs against teams like that. So on the analytics side, for me, the most important thing is finding those weak, specific spots in the defense that you can really attack. And I think there's a lot of value in that. That's the fun part about daily, is that you can take those players week to week. You don't just have to draft one guy. You can play whoever has that good matchup for that specific week.
And I would say, from a football perspective, when we go into a game, our game plan, the things we look at, we'll get our game plan. I was telling these guys, Wednesday will be the official game plan. And in that booklet will be all the stats, numbers, fronts, everything you can imagine, their percentage on different downs. But the key stats we look at is, okay, where are they ranked against the run? Like the Bears, I think were dead last year. One of them. Where are they ranked against the run? Where are they ranked against the pass? And then you start from there. And we know, I haven't played in a couple of years, but if we're going against the worst rushing defense in the league, it's going to be a game plan that's filled heavy run probably, to get them to suck up, to have to put 8 in the box. And then that's when you take your shots downfield. But as an offense, you're going to attack the weakness, whether you're a throwing team or not. If it's a bad rushing defense, you're going to try to establish the run often and early. Then once you get up, a couple touchdowns, you just run the ball out, run the ball. So I know there's some teams, obviously, that we talk like Detroit, Calvin and Matt Stafford, they're going to throw the ball up and make their plays. But I just always remember our game plan. We would stick to our game plan until defense took it away from us. So. If it was a great pass defense, obviously we're gonna try to run the ball. So.
And I think one important point is just trying to figure out how you always hear about situational football, especially with the Patriots. So it's how does situational football translate into fantasy? So a defense, we always go into the game with the mindset we need to stop the run. So if you stop the run in the 2nd and long, what are the offense going to do? More than likely they're going to throw the ball. So if you have a good front 4 in your defensive line, you can create pressure with 4, so you end up getting more sacks, more turnovers, more pass attempts, which leads to more opportunities to turn the ball over. So just trying to think like that if you can force a team to throw the ball more often, that gives you a rush, more opportunities to get to the quarterback, turn over the ball. On the other side of the ball, it gives the quarterback more opportunities to throw, more volume targets for the receivers, more PPR catches for the running backs, and so it just kind of goes that way. So you're using that to predict game flow.
I love how Tank immediately starts talking about fantasy defenses. Like right away, he's thinking about, okay, if we can get them in 2nd and long, 3rd and long, we get more pressure opportunities, we get more turnover opportunities. And that is stuff that we look for when assessing fantasy defenses as well. You want a team that's going to play from ahead, put pressure on another team to become one-dimensional, and generate those opportunities, because when you're a fantasy defense, you're going to score points by sacks, by turnovers, and most turnovers happen in the passing game, interceptions, strip fumbles, and different things like that. So I think it's funny, the defensive guy goes right to the fantasy defense.
How much time do you guys put into defense, like picking your defense, because I know offensively, that's probably most of your time, but defensively, with exception, like Seattle's a couple of great defenses, but how much time during the week do you guys put into that, or dailies or whatever?
I try to put a lot of time into it, and actually a really cool thing about picking a fantasy defense daily is oftentimes there's a lot of correlation with another player. So like I love to take a running back and the defense together. So like last year, Trey Mason had a huge game, his biggest game of the year. It was also when the Rams had their biggest game defensively. So there's a lot of correlation that you can actually take into account, and that's going to give you upside to win these big tournaments. So I like to look at defense. It's a huge thing. To win these tournaments, you need that defense that puts up 20 fantasy points. So it's a big part of it.
For me, I'm looking at, defensively, I'm looking at, does the offensive line against them have something changing? Because the more solid an offensive line is, the more they play together, the more the less injuries they have, the easier it's going to be for them to have a solid front. They're not going to allow as much pressure in the backfield. And as Drew said, the things that lead to a fantasy defense getting points, sacks, fumbles, interceptions, all of those things happen when you get pressure on the quarterback. So if they can, as Tank said, stop the run, turn you into a one-dimensional team and get a lot of pressure on the quarterback, whether it's because the offensive line is less solid that week because of injury or changing of parts, or whether it's because of just the fact that they have J.J. Watt, he's going to get in the backfield, doesn't matter when, he's just going to get there. It's going to cause rush throws turn into interceptions. If they're to the outside, it turns into a pick six the other way. And the other thing is, there's a lot of variance on defense. Defense is very touchdown heavy. It's very, you have to get touchdowns every defense have a great week at them. And defensive touchdowns are very hard to predict, almost pretty much impossible to predict defensive touchdowns. But we can predict pressure on the quarterback. We can predict whether or not they're going to play from ahead a little bit more frequently than we can predict, well, they're definitely going to score a touchdown this week in the kicking game or by causing a fumble or interception.
You talk about predicting this, predicting that. Can you explain the process you guys go through into projecting opportunities? I mean, I don't know where you want to start that conversation, but you got a lot of things to project here.
Yeah, so I take it from a very top level, and the first thing that I do when I'm trying to project opportunities is I try to project how many plays there are going to be in a game. And from there, you get a fast-paced offense like Philadelphia, you're going to get more plays in a game, not only for Philadelphia, but for the opponent as well, because the opponent's going to be forced to play to that tempo. So I start from the very top level and try to project how many plays, and then I try to look at pass run distribution history from the team. So if a team historically throws the ball 58% of the time, runs the ball 42% of the time, I've got a play number, and now I've got a pass play number, and now I've got a run play number. And then from there, I can kind of work into the game. If they're heavy favorites, you start to tilt more to the run side. If they're heavy underdogs, you start to tilt more to the pass side. And then I break it down to the individual players. So which player typically gets a certain portion of the targets in the passing game. Usually a wide receiver is going to get somewhere around 30 to 35% of the targets. So if they're throwing 35 times, you're looking at 10 to 12 targets. And you just kind of work down from there. And so I take it from the top level, and then I break down, and I project each position. And then from there, you use some efficiency statistics, like how many yards per target do they usually get, and different things like that. But really, the opportunities, like Al alluded to, is where you want to start, because the more opportunities you get, the more balls thrown in the direction of the wide receiver, the more touches for the running back, the more opportunities you have to score points.
I mean, for the most part, these guys are somewhat predictable. Antonio Brown, the most predictable guy. He's going to get you 10 fantasy points, minimum, every single week that he plays. He's got a streak of how many games now? With 5 catches and 50 yards minimum, the longest in history. It's gone for 2 seasons at this point. So he's got a 10-point floor every single week. That doesn't mean he's only going to score 10 points. But when you roster Antonio Brown in daily fantasy, you're getting 10 points plus whatever else he's going to get. Because he's going to get the ball thrown to him a ton, he's going to catch a good percentage of those, and he's going to get yards, touchdowns, also possible.
Yeah, so I have a very similar approach to Drew, and take it even further. I really, again, I look at the injuries and I look at what other teams have done against specific defense. So if I see, okay, it's week 8, this team has given up a ton of touchdowns to wide receiver 2, automatically I'm going to bump up my projection for the receiver 2 that's going against them that week. So in addition to that, I think it's really important to identify injuries. If a team just lost to their, top defensive lineman, you're going to have a great opportunity for the running back. Quarterback's going to be able to do better because they're not going to have the same pass rush. So I really try to do exactly what Drew does, identify what the pace of the game is going to be, how many plays there are going to be, what the opportunities are, and then try to identify how the other team's going to attack that defense.
What's your guys' reaction to hearing this process?
I think it's insane. I really do. I mean, I know, and Tank knows this, how many hours we put in during the week, film study, but we don't do the analytics side, we don't do the numbers side. We have the basic stats, but we just watch film and film and film, and you know, in this situation they're going to blitz, in this red zone we know we can attack here. I mean, it's insane. I think it's great. But it's just like we were talking yesterday. It was like the devote. It's 24/7 job, you know. And for us, you know, you're putting hours and hours in a day. But then, you know, you play your game, you go home Sunday, you have off day Tuesday. You're always studying the opponent, but not to the depth that they're getting into, for sure.
When you hear these projections, and you were telling us yesterday, what, you've got 150 plays in your playbook, and then what, you run 50? As you hear them describe the projection process, I don't know, when you know what you're working with, and then you know what ends up on the field, what perspective can you give them in that sense?
Just from, I was telling them yesterday, when I was in Houston for Coach Gary Kubiak, now in Denver, we would install probably 120, 130 plays a week, which was just ridiculous. And a lot of them are just every week it's the same play. You know, you just put in your basic stuff. And we would run, I think the average was like 50 to 55 plays that are run in a game. Now, Philly and some of the other teams that go up tempo is probably more. But you'd be lucky to get 55 plays in a game, I think, maybe 60 sometimes. And very rarely do you ever stick to your game plan going in, just because you can never predict the outcome of a football game. You know, there's turnovers. You can, like you said, you know, you go in against a team that has a great front four. Obviously, they're going to get pressure, so you have some type of awareness of what's going on. But you can never predict how many times you're going to throw, like, you know, to Andre Johnson. You know we have a couple plays that we want to take shots downfield to him, but we also know that the defense is probably going to double team him or bracket him sometimes. So we go in the game plan. We want to get Arian Foster going, you know, because that's where our offense went through him first. But you can never predict the outcome. You just never know, because fumbles, turnovers, one play can change the momentum of a football game and totally take you out of your game plan. So for us, especially as a quarterback, I was telling them yesterday, because we were talking about, you know, who do you look for in certain plays, you know, slot receivers, outside receivers. We have a very offense, especially in Kubiak's system, it's very progression oriented. We're just going to 1, 2, 3 to a check down. It didn't really matter if it was Andre Johnson as our first target, you know, who else? Jacoby Jones was there. If it was our 2, to Owen Daniels, who was our 3, it was us reading the defense and taking what the defense gave them. So we did say some teams, like the Lions, where Stafford, I'm sure a lot of times, he's just going to throw a ball up to Calvin because they can do that, because he can get away with it. But it's hard to project as a player. Obviously, we're not thinking about fantasy when we're playing, but we just never know the outcome of the game. You know, you can never control it. We just know our game plan and how we want to attack the defense in certain situations.
And I think, just to piggyback on what these guys say, I mean, they arrive at the conclusion a totally different way than me, but I think it ends up being about the same. So, for example, I think we talked about this yesterday, the Green Bay New England game last year. So you're just trying to predict game flow, and you know that Belichick wants to take away their best player. So how do you do that? So going into that game, I figured that Devontae Adams would get off, because they put Reeves on Cobb, and then they put Browner on Nelson, and they had safety over the top. So then you have Devontae Adams as the number 3 backside. And so you know the quarterback, Aaron Rodgers, is going to go to the easiest throw, which is backside 1-1. And so if you're able to look at it that way and try to figure out who they're going to take away, and figure out who has the most upside and the best value, which is Devontae Adams, which he was probably like 3 or 4,500, something like that, really cheap on daily. So then that's how you get your upside, just trying to predict game flow.
That's a great point. I remember, you always have the number 1 receiver. Now, they're always going to get targets, because that's how good they're always going to get their catches. But when we play against the defense, we knew, you know, in Arizona, that Larry Fitzgerald was going to get double teamed almost the whole game. You know, they were going to put a safety over the top and play a corner press and just take away. So we would move him around slightly just to get him the ball more. But that's a great point, is if there's a second receiver, a third receiver, you know they're going to get a lot of balls, because, you know, the number 1 receiver, if the defense is good, they're going to shut him down and make these other guys make plays. And that's a great point.
Yeah, I think that's a really great point, too. It's something I'm always looking for. So if you're facing a team that has an elite corner, like Darrelle Revis, almost always that corner's going to be on the number one receiver. So that's going to open up a lot of opportunities for the second receiver and the third receiver. And that's a gold mine in daily fantasy because those second and third receivers are a lot cheaper than these number one guys. So whenever you see a defense that has an elite player, elite corner, there's a ton of opportunity for the second and third receivers.
I mean, going to something that Matt said, we kind of arrive at the same sort of stuff. You get your game packet on Wednesday with your entire game plan for the week, and you're looking at, okay, well, what are they soft in? Right? And what can we attack? And we're looking at the same sort of stuff. It's like I always use like the analogy of the lion, the Sahara Desert. He's not going after the strongest, biggest wildebeest out there. He's looking for the one with 3 legs and can easily take down. We're kind of doing the same thing. We're just looking for the 3-legged wildebeest. So against Arizona, guess what? How don't play tight ends? Why? Because they're terrible against tight ends. And you guys get that same information when you're breaking down film. So when you get that information, you say, what? Well, I guess we're going to attack the tight end this week. So we're looking at, well, they're probably going to attack the tight end this week. So while you're not looking at it from an analytics standpoint, you're looking at, well, based on film, because on the field you have to take in all that stuff so that you can read and react. They did this, which means I have to do this. Where we kind of look at it from the analytics standpoint of the math says that they're probably going to attack the tight end this week, and what you're saying is based on film study and based on your game packet, we're probably going to attack the tight end this week. So we're kind of on the same page, even though we're coming at it from a completely different angle.
As the season progresses and you have more data to work with, does that change your approach? Does that change your week's preparation?
Yeah, for me, it's a huge difference. Early in the season, I'm trying to watch a lot more games and trying to get a feel, watching NFL Rewind and different things like that, because the data samples are so small that something can get skewed significantly by one game. So the first 8 weeks of the season, I'm leaning a lot on player evaluation, sites like Pro Football Focus and different things like that. They grade individual players, but also what I'm seeing kind of in the NFL Rewind. And I don't have these guys' perspective in terms of watching game tape, but I can see areas where guys are consistently getting attacked, whether it's a second corner or whether it's over the middle or certain portions of the field. And I try to lean on that. Then once I have about 8 weeks worth of data, I feel like I have a lot of good information that I can get a hold of, and I can lean a little bit more on the data from that point out. But it's a definite difference early in the season compared to late in the season when you have data that you feel a little bit more comfortable working with.
Yeah, and as the season goes along, and to break it down into daily fantasy perspective, early in the season is the best time to kind of go against the grain or to be contrarian, because everybody thinks that they know what's going to happen, and that isn't necessarily true. Going into last season, we all thought that the Dallas Cowboys were going to have an absolutely terrible defense. It was going to be a horribly efficient defense. They were going to give up a lot of yards through the air. They would not be able to stop anybody on the ground. That proved to be completely true. It was a bad defense. However, their coaching staff did a fantastic job because they said, wow, we have a really bad defense. What can we do? Let's not let the other team have the ball, but for about like 20 minutes a game. That might help if we keep our defense off the field. So while their defense was still bad, everybody early in the season was just attacking the Cowboys, going running backs against the Cowboys, going wide receivers against the Cowboys, just kind of blindly, because that was what the groupthink kind of said. Anything you read said, they have a bad defense, attack that defense. But because of the way they ran their offense, it didn't allow the players that were playing against them to get off. So early in the season is a great time to kind of